Well, Africa is the third largest recipient of Chinese outward foreign direct investment, totaling nearly $90 billion. Driven by a desire to secure natural resources and tap new markets, state-owned enterprises have made large investments throughout Africa. And joining us for a look at the opportunities, risks and the reality of Chinese investment onto the continent is Milton Osborn. He's banking and finance partner at Norton Rose. Milton, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Well, talk us through this evolution we're seeing in the China-Africa relationship from a business perspective, from a trading perspective.
Thank you, Alishia. I think it's a natural development as the Chinese are looking globally to build on the mineral wealth, or to build their to generate mineral resources that they require. Africa is a natural ally. There's historically been very close links between the two. Although we're seeing a maturity of the relationship. And that came to a head recently when they had the FOCAC, Forum of Africa, China-Africa relationships, in a meeting in Beijing. Mm-hmm. And growing out of that is a real understanding between China and most of the African countries of a maturing of the relationship and also a development of the relationship. And China has undertaken on the back of that conference to invest heavily in Africa and in African resources. To some extent, it is a little bit of an uncomfortable relationship in that the demands of the Chinese are to take resources. And the question that the Africans are asking, African countries and African leaders are asking, is what are you going to be leaving behind? Mm-hmm. And that came to the fore during the conference. Indeed, President Zuma spoke quite clearly about it. And I think at the next conference, which is going to be held here in South Africa in 3 years' time, you will see a sea change. And the African leaders will be asking, what has the Chinese delivered over the last 3 years?
Milton, I remember about 3 decades ago when I was a commodity trader, the Chinese going to Brazil and they wanted Brazilian soybean oil, soybean meal. And so instead of going there and signing some contracts, what they did was they went to Brazil and they said, we'll build you a new port so that you can send the stuff to us. And that was, to me, sort of paving the way for what the Chinese have been doing in Africa now for quite a while. But they have got bad press, as you quite rightly pointed out. And in a way, you've answered my question about the maturity of the relationship and whether that FOCAC meeting has focused the Chinese consciousness on the fact that in the past they may have supported political regimes that are not palatable. Are they cognizant of that?
I think they are cognizant of it. To some extent, they've gone after the lowest hanging fruit. And I think it's going to be difficult to change that model. But again, I think they're aware that the relationships are maturing. You're not going to be able to get access as easily as you used to with simple trade and you know the sort of concepts that you discussed earlier, or you mentioned earlier. So I think it's a growing relationship. I think it's being watched globally. Certainly the US have been speaking up about what they've referred to, which is probably a bit unfair, but as Chinese imperialism. So I think the relationship's maturing, and I think that, the sort of activities you mentioned are going to go on, but it's going to change, and China does want to change the model that they're involved in.
As you highlighted, we always look at the imperialistic nature of the relationship that China brings to Africa, but when it comes to China and how they do business when they invest in Africa, what are some of the issues that are front of mind for them? Because ordinarily you've got labor, you've got certainty, security, infrastructure as well. But to a large extent, they bring a lot of that with them when they set up shop here.
You're absolutely correct. They like to look and they like to go to jurisdictions where they're comfortable that the model that they've rolled out across Africa they can do in that jurisdiction. That said, there is a shift now to being more responsible. I think they're aware they're being watched. And they're happy to invest, for example, in Australia, where they don't have the labour access. There's a strict rule of law, and they're going after the mature assets there. So they are comfortable investing in a place where rule of law applies, and you can't just bring in your labour. That said, again, if there's better margins to be made across Africa, perhaps they will chase those.
Yeah.
Milton, we normally associate Chinese demand for commodities with commodities like, for example, iron ore and coal and a few other of the industrial metals. But what about agriculture? We're talking to the Land Bank later on in this show, and food is very much in focus on CNBC Africa throughout the day. I know they've already started, but is agriculture is going to be a focus in the future once they've moved on from their, as I said, from the traditional commodities that we associate them with?
I don't think it's a thing for the future. I think it's a reality that's happening at the moment. There's definitely murmurings, or there's definitely activity in the market where the Chinese are looking for food security. They've got a lot of activity, for example, in Ethiopia. And the way they're doing it is not necessarily just buying up land and farming the land. They're very active as well with seed production and across the food market. So very active. It's high on their agenda, and I think they're realizing that there's a lot of mouths to feed.